Welcome again to The Trap of Good Enough, how top leadership teams break through. We're excited to have you here for this conversation today, a conversation that shines a light on how easily good teams can get stuck and how the best teams get unstuck. Today, we'll explore what it takes for teams to break out of complacency and shift from competent to truly exceptional. Leading this conversation, we are lucky to be joined by Mark Burrell, who knows a little something about teams. Mark is a seasoned coach and advisor to C-suite leaders and executive teams. He's known for creating breakthrough moments in team dialogue and dynamics, in alignment, and in trust. He leads the consulting team at Leadership Circle Asia Pacific and serves as our global practice lead for Team Accelerator. Mark has spent decades helping organizations build stronger cultures and more cohesive teams. Widely recognized for his ability to guide leaders and organizations through complex transitions, Mark brings deep wisdom and a steady hand to moments that matter most. And when he's not doing all of that, or working to help build stronger connections between local businesses and the Indigenous communities of Australia, you'll probably find him surfing on the beach in Sydney. Mark, welcome today. Thank you so much for joining us. If you're ready to hop in, we've got a lot of good interest already in the chat, and I know it's going to be a great session. I hand it over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. That's a very warm welcome. And as I was listening to you, I saw a comment from Zenthia Brown, excuse me, Zenthia, if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly, saying that Sarah has set a high bar for me. So I think you have. I will do my best to live into that possibility. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move my screen that's showing the Zoom over to everyone else, so that over to my other screen, so that I can kind of look at my slides. So forgive me, everyone, as I kind of toggle my head between a screen which has slides and another screen which has your Zoom images. So it's wonderful to be with you. As Sarah said, I live in Sydney, Australia, and many of you will know that one of the weaknesses of us Australians is that we struggle to pronounce our vowels. So I will do my best to speak as articulately as I can, but if I somehow my accent makes it difficult to hear, please put it in the chat, and I'll make sure that I slow down. So I'm really delighted to have this conversation. I've been working with leadership teams for over 20 years. And I think that for far too long, organizations have thought of team effectiveness as a development process. How do we do great team development? How do we have a great team experience or a team event? And all those things are important, but actually, I think teams go to the heart of how to create exceptional organizations. So I'm going to lay out some thoughts with you. And to begin with, I can get my screen to work here. This one here. Okay, Sarah, can you see this?
Yes, sir. We've got the leadership team effectiveness sets the ceiling slide open.
Okay, good. I've suddenly just lost my Zoom view. So I don't know what's happened. Anyway, I know you're all there, so Sarah, I might just have to check in to make sure that I'm not speaking into cyberspace.
No problem, Mark.
So what I'd like to share with you today is this concept that leadership teams and how they perform, how they operate, the way in which they lead together is more than just a performance issue. Addressing that is more than just a development issue. It's how you raise the ceiling on what's possible in the organisation. So in particular, I have some ideas that I would like to share, and some data and some metrics and some case studies around how it is that teams influence the performance agenda much more significantly than what's often appreciated. I'll talk to you about what good teams look like versus what average teams look like, and also what exceptional teams look like. And even the language that we're all familiar with of high-performing teams, as useful as that is, I'd like to actually provoke you with some different ideas, different ways of thinking about describing teams, because as we all know, then when we name things well, then we're in a much better position to work out how to shift them. And then I'd like to give you some reasons why it's hard and harder than often is appreciated to move from being good to exceptional. And then we'll have a conversation together. So maybe to dive us straight into the topic, let me start with a proposition that I'm sure everyone on this call will agree with. And that is that teaming is an imperative to the strategic agenda, fundamentally because most of the work that is vital to organizational success is done in teams. So I think of teams as the core building block for how accountability is distributed and the way work is done. Unless you have a very strange organization where people just live in back rooms, never talk to each other, everything that gets done is done through relationships and specifically clusters of people in teams. And in fact, teams are the relational unit of organizational life. They're the energy system. And if we know that an organization's energy is vital to performance, then really what we're talking about when we think about strategic performance, we're talking about team performance and how teams are functioning. Yet, it's all too common that many teams that we've all worked in and that we see and we experience somehow fail to live up to their potential. And just some interesting statistics that I've pulled together here. Many of you will relate. A study from Harvard Business Review that suggested that up to 75% of teams in general are dysfunctional, or other studies that have said only 25 to 40% can be called effective. Now, I'm going to give you some further statistics on that come from our research that's even more provoking than that. However, those that do perform, teams that do perform, have an outsized impact. And, it's popular to say the data is in or the science is in, and I don't want to be as flippant as that, but there is a plethora of research that talks about how when teams are performing well, those teams have an outsized impact on the capacity for innovation, the capacity for improved financial performance, productivity. It's terrific studies by Mercer and Gallup on the relationship between employee engagement and effective teams, customer satisfaction. And the list goes on and on and on. So the imperative is clear and the data is clear. Yet, many leadership teams these are the folks that set the ceiling of what's possible, seem impaired. And in fact, when you look at the research, it's not so much a depressing story, but I think it's a shocking story. A great study by Forbes that suggested that C-suites that leaders won see significantly higher growth in revenue. So it's another validation. Yet over 90% of surveyed leaders say their executive teams were actually struggling to lead as one. Or 65% of leaders in another study from the Centre for Creative Leadership, and we can give you the sources for these later, by the way, say that their senior leadership teams struggle between functional and enterprise priorities. I mean, how many times do we hear that when we're working with leadership teams? Is we want our leaders to get out of silos and think in enterprise. I'll have more to say about that in a minute. And if you need even more evidence, great research by McKinsey that looked at how cohesive teams financially outperform greater than twice their peers. So the data and the research validates this imperative again and again and again. Now, what we have done in the Leadership Circle through an extraordinary group of researchers that we have who work full-time for us, they're the brilliant psychometricians and researchers behind the Leadership Circle profile and many of the other tools that we have. They have recently completed a multi-year study on what drives exceptional teaming. I have a study that looked at teaming across different cultures, different organizations. In fact, over 26,000 teams and thousands of leadership teams were examined in the course of their research. Now, what we've discovered, and I'll be sharing a case study of the implications of that research, what we've discovered is that you can think about teams and team effectiveness and leadership teams and kind of these four categories: low, moderate, high, and exceptional. Now, Sarah, I'm going to just have to ask you to relay this. So if I just played with you all for a moment and asked the question, what percentage of leadership teams, so these are teams at the top of the organization, they might be the very top team, or they might be the senior leadership team of a major business unit. Just quickly put in the chat, what percentage of teams do you think would be in the low category?
Oh, we've got a first answer of like 75, 65. Oh, someone says 1%, Mark. About 60, 35, 40%. It looks like we're kind of anywhere between about 30 and 65% for the most part. But a few folks who are not very positive, 20%, 15, 1%.
I know. Maybe I've painted a picture that things are dire. Perhaps that's a wrong picture. Or perhaps we all know the pain. We all have felt the suffering of working in teams that are just operating well below the potential. So the figure from our research, that this multi-year research, looking at thousands of teams, is about 33%. Now, we call these low effectiveness teams. And a low effectiveness team is one whose performance energy is severely impaired. And we all know what these look like. They're overly reactive to events. They struggle to shift behaviours in themselves. They spend their time looking inwards and in disagreements, struggle to execute on priorities. These types of teams represent a governance risk to the organisation. And by governance risk, you think about financial performance. Well, the capacity to deliver on financial outcomes, the budgets, are governance issues. If you had a set of business assets, or 30% of your business assets were impaired financially, well, that would be a major governance issue. So up to 30% of leadership teams are impaired. Now, if we then look at moderate, so a further 45% are what we would call moderate. So this is the great majority of leadership teams. Now, what we mean by moderate is that they're performing okay, but their capacity is disrupted. Now, most leadership teams measure at this level, and this is what we would call good enough. In fact, when we explore what most people are describing when they're talking high performance, they're often describing what we would call moderate. They're able to deliver their results, but with a lot of friction. There's a high energy cost. And often the governance risk here is that the ability to go beyond just the expected performance to create outperformance. Now, what many of us might think of as high performance, we call high effectiveness. And these are teams who are generating energy for themselves and for the organisation. So a high effectiveness team looks like one who can deliver on the targets, create the right kind of interpersonal reactions. There's often high trust, lots of respect for one another, often full of brilliant technical leaders, but their challenge is to fully act as one. They might be accountable for their performance of their functions and their silos, but turning that into outperformance is the challenge. So the risk for many high effectiveness teams is strategic drift. They focus on the execution of performance, which they're good at, but it's difficult for them to break out. And only 15% of teams measure out at that level. But there's another level. We call this exceptional teams. So this is the governance prize of an organisation. Now, fewer than 7% or about 7% measure out at this level. And I'll talk in a minute about what we mean by measuring out. An exceptional leadership team is rare. So these are teams that are able to release the creative energy of others at scale. They have the capacity to not only perform well, but actually to shift stuck patterns in the organisation and to lead transformation. So this is what we think the landscape looks like. If you're in low performance, low effectiveness, well, that's a governance risk. Most teams are stuck at moderate. High is a wonderful achievement, but the risk is actually to be caught in strategic drift, and exceptional is another level. So what does all that look like? What are the reasons why teams get stuck at these different levels and struggle to move into the higher reaches? So we think a core reason number one, and I'm going to give you three, are the thinking and routines that keep us all stuck in the familiar. So there's an old story, many of you might have heard it before, of a man who is looking for his keys, and he's under a lamplight. It's nighttime, and he's searching and searching, and someone comes up to him and sees him searching and says, what are you doing? He says, I've lost my car keys. I've lost my keys. And the man who came up to him said, well, where did you lose them? And he points in a direction different to where he's looking, which is under a lamplight. And then the obvious question is, well, why are you looking here? And the man says, well, this is where the light is. And I think it's a great little story of what happens for us is that many of us stay where we are familiar. We search for what's possible, under the lamplight, so to speak. So there's a mismatch between the ambition and the context or the complexity that we operate in. And this is what it looks like. So most of us are very familiar with the first task of good teaming, which is to get performance operating. And it's common for us to think of ourselves and to think of the organizations that we're in and the teams that we're in as sort of machines who need to deliver high performance, execute well, and to sort of optimize on the limited resources that all of us have. What is common as a way of organizing ourselves or organizing teams is what we would call sort of operating like a swim team, where everyone gets in their silos, they're clear on what agenda has to be executed, what the strategic plan looks like, and in a swim lane context, or in an environment where you are familiar with what needs to be achieved, it's worked before. Well, the idea is to scale best practice, coordinate well between functions, and so on. So we would describe this, and I would describe this as the way most people think about what teaming is all about. How do we get high performance, execute well on the limited resources, stay within our responsibilities, scale up best practice? However, there's a mismatch between how many leadership teams talk and how they organise themselves. Because if you ask many leadership teams what they want and what they're going for, you'll find their ambition is often all about how they disrupt, how they transform, or how they break out of their circumstances. And in that kind of thinking, it's much more than just how do we optimize what we currently have, how do we perform well with what we know. It's really about how do we transform. And fundamentally different routines are required. So instead of being like a swim team, it really requires you to be more like a group in a whitewater raft where things are highly uncertain. And instead of delivering solutions that have worked in the past, and if you just do it again, it's likely to work, more than likely the operating complexity outcomes are uncertain. It's less about how you work within boundaries and more within the ecosystem. It requires you to slow down and collaborate differently. So this is a major challenge for most leadership teams. In fact, there's a kind of threshold between what most leadership teams say they want and the operating environment that they're in, which is all about transformation, lots of complexity, and how they organise themselves, which is more in the domain of working within what's familiar. So, for an example that we've seen in this space, or let me make it personal. It's interesting that great studies have been done on this, that most people who attempt to lose weight can often lose it, but then put it back on again plus 10%. And we've all had experiences of that when, for example, we've tried to cut costs in an organisation. So we need to lift profitability. The directive comes out, slash costs by 10%, whatever it is. Most of us can do that. We know it works, but then only to experience, often sooner than what we realise, costs are back to where they were within 6 months, 12 months, and often more. So there's some kind of complexity that actually drives the system. So I recently worked with a healthcare organisation that had a focus on delivering greater market access for their drugs. And they were brilliant at following a playbook on how they launched drugs into market. However, they'd sort of got to the limits of that. No matter how much they deployed the best practice and they executed well, they just weren't achieving their growth. What they discovered was that in the particular market that they were focused on, that their focus was all about education. However, the clients, the customers of their particular pharmaceutical drug, weren't moved by knowledge, by education. What influenced their behaviour is their willingness to actually take or get medical support, knowing that they could look after the family. So actually what this organisation had to do was collaborate with insurance companies. They even brought in government education departments, and it was a whole of healthcare system intervention that was required before people were willing to take a risk and engage more proactively in their own healthcare. So there's an example of where what they wanted was a radical and a significantly more innovative market access, but they were deploying sort of familiar routines that were just keeping them stuck in the known. So that's reason number one, is that most leadership teams think and talk with high ambition, and their context is one that's complex, but they organise themselves into familiar and complicated routines that keep them stuck doing what they've always been doing. Reason number two is what I would simply call too much talent thinking without enough team thinking. So think about your own organisation, perhaps. And I think this is true globally. Most organisations would have talent maps and succession plans for individuals. We recognise that's a core governance requirement, to think about who are the key talent, how do we get them ready. Yet, teams or few would have maps of leadership team effectiveness. And it's very odd because teams are the core energy unit of organisational life. So some of you will be familiar with that sort of biological process called downward causation. Downward causation is a principle where higher level systems, like an organism, actually regulate the behaviour of lower level organisms, like genes. And so in organisations, the same principle applies. So great individuals can have their effectiveness sub-optimized and pulled down by the quality of the team system. And even the great management theorist Edward Deming sort of said it very well many years ago. He said, put good people in a bad system and you'll get bad results. And we know this even in sporting teams. If you have a team of star players, it doesn't guarantee a great team. But if you have a great team, it creates great players. So in many organisations, the focus has become, and rightly so, how do we develop individuals? Do we know who our talent are? Do we have a talent map, and how are we supporting them? And that is terrific. But actually, given organisations are living systems and teams are the core emotional unit that regulate individuals, it's a very odd thing that we don't have team effectiveness maps. So supporting the growth of individuals is one thing. Helping a team system operate skillfully is another. And so I saw this quote recently from a psychiatrist called Murray Bowen, and I liked it. It's a little wordy, but let me just read it out because it captures very well this principle. It's not that people are not motivated to be different. So Murray Bowen, famous psychiatrist, family system psychiatrist, was talking about what it takes for people to change. So it's not that people are not motivated to be different. It's just that they are not aware of how their emotional patterns are influenced by the emotional system they are a part of, and how this exerts a greater impact on their choices, their automatic emotional states, and their internal motivation system. So we can all relate to this, I think. We can all, who's ever gone back to home for Christmas or a family event and suddenly found themselves back in their 16-year-old self? So there's something about being in a system that can regulate and actually have downward causation. And so the challenge, of course, is understanding what that system looks like. But I would say that, and we would say that not only is it a responsibility for leaders to know who their talent is and grow great talent, leaders must architect the team system, not only grow talent. So that's reason number 2. But reason number 3 is all this stuff about the team system, it can often feel abstract. And you'll know, particularly when dealing with hard-nosed managers or being one yourself, that old principle, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it, you can't improve it. So it's up until now, it's been very hard to measure precisely what the team system looks like and how it's regulating performance. Yet we all know it's real. So, for example, if you think about, if you watch a flag fluttering in the wind, well, you can't see the wind, but we know it's real because of the way the flag is fluttering. So that's what a team system is. Now, back to the researchers I spoke to about, our team of researchers who've done this extraordinary multi-year research study. As a result of that, they've produced a tool called Bright, which actually gives all of us working in organisations a very powerful full measurement system for how this team system is operating. So I'm going to quickly explain it, then I'm going to give you a case study. So Bright is our metaphor for the team's energy system. And like a light bulb that's fully activated, that's bright, the more effective a team is, the brighter its energy. And one of the core dimensions, the core measures of success is a capacity of a team to produce the right results. Another is the capacity of a team to make sense of all the information in its environment and to turn that into the right kind of insights and shared actions. We call that processing information. The third is the capacity of a team to develop the right kind of conditions for safety and cohesion. And contained within here are what we would typically think of as trust and psychological safety and the capacity to take risks together, but also the ability to have the right sort of structures, skills, reward systems, and all the mechanisms, the structures that enable the teams to be performing effectively. and critically, the right mindsets, a one-team mindset that enables everyone to align together and move from sort of focus on I and self-interest to focus on we. So this system, Bright, these 5 dimensions, is a mechanism to measure this mysterious team system that we all know is real, that regulates and modulates individual performance, so that you can actually measure it and then work out what to do. So let's talk about some real examples. How are we going with time, Sarah? Let me just look at the clock. Oops.
Yeah, we've got about 10 minutes until we want to start our Q&A.
Very good.
Yeah.
Thank you. I forgot to press my stopwatch. So,
and Mark, actually, let me interrupt and say if the slides are not necessarily pertinent to the real world examples you're sharing, let's stop sharing so we can see your face a little bigger.
Okay, sure. All right. I'll do my best. So here's a real leadership team. So using this Bright instrument that looks at these 5 factors of teaming, what we can do is specifically measure on a scale of 0 to 100 whether a team is, those 5 dimensions are creating an ineffective team, a low-performing team, a moderately effective team, high-performing team, or an exceptional team. And I'm going to give you a quick case study of a team that recently did this survey and measured as moderately effective. In other words, they scored 67 out of 100. Sorry, I realised I didn't put my next slide on. So scale of 0 to 100, you can see on the left-hand side, you can see along the bottom those categories of team effectiveness that I was speaking to earlier. And this team scored 67. So right at the very edge of high performance. So what does this look like for this organisation? So this is a very successful financial services or fintech organisation operating in a highly competitive environment. They actually are the dominant market leader. They have the majority market share for most of their products, but their growth was falling below target. And many of us here could probably relate to that situation. You have a terrific product, it's well adopted, but growth is just not living up to expectations. So that's the strategic situation of this fintech organisation operating in a highly competitive environment. Things are going well, but it's in strategic drift, to go back to that framing I gave you before. So with the Bright instrument, or this Bright survey that scores a team out of 0 to 100, you can think of that energy system as either being fully activated, being bright, being perhaps partially dimmed or partially activated, or being insufficient. So straight away you can see across these 5 dimensions, total score of 67, however, with some really bright energy, a real sense of one mindset, the right structure, the right people, the right composition, a high level of safety cohesion. So trust was high, interpersonal interactions are high. In fact, this is a team that all deployed our Leadership Circle 360 profile, and every single member of the team came out high creative. So when you put all of their results together, this was a high creative, low reactive team, yet somehow they weren't synergizing, they weren't turning that into the right kind of impact. They were only moderate and effective, or moderately effective, excuse me. And I said before that a leadership team system, the behaviour of a leadership team sets the ceiling, and this was the case. How this team was operating, or the fact that they were moderate in effectiveness, was reflected in the strategic challenge they were facing. And you can see here with the numbers that the area of their team performance that was most impaired was their capacity to produce results. So they scored only 56. So a score of 56, what does that mean? Means this. So within each of those 5 elements, what we do And what you can do if you use this instrument is look at those elements of a team system that are generating energy for high performance and exceptional performance versus those elements of the team system that are disrupting energy. So we think about energy generators and energy disruptors, which parallel with creative and reactive leadership. Now, what this team did in the face of significant pressure to get out of this strategic drift is they went straight to what many teams do, which is assume it's an execution and accountability problem. And you can see on the left-hand side how this team scored against what we know, or the research shows, are the major energy generators for producing results. So collaborative problem solving, strategic planning, etc. Now, unless you've used this tool, these numbers might not mean a lot, but what we know is that you need to be above 80. If you're a senior leadership team, you want to be above 80 in these energy generators to be creating the right kind of impact. So you can see they're well below those things, and their mind immediately went to, well, the problem is execution and collective accountability. Now, yes, because their energy generator activity is low. However, when you look on the other side, the energy disruptors, we use a metric that says, well, energy disruptors are ways of behaving, and a score above 40 means that they are so disruptive that they are pulling down those generators. And so while they do have a problem, or had a problem with accountability, the fundamental disruptor to their effectiveness was reactive responding. And you can see groupthink and capitulation being, they try and they just can't get what they want, and then they just give up. That's that stuckness. So what this team was able to do was see in a much more powerful way precisely how they were using their energy and what was keeping them stuck and what was causing this strategic drift and preventing them from being able to lift their overall organisational growth rate. So what was done about it? So firstly, what this team cleverly did is, instead of doing what they normally do, which is say, here's the problem, it's accountability, and let's now just drive more execution and drive more accountability processes into the organisation. And they have very powerful playbooks for how they drive accountability and execution when performance is not sufficient. So those are the familiar and routines or best practice activity. So what they did is they stopped themselves and named the pattern. And in this case, the pattern was a sense of reactive responding. So when a stakeholder or the market said to them, look, we're not happy about the fact that your growth is falling below target, or you're not going to meet this quarter's sales targets, they would just drop straight into those familiar fire drills to address those performance challenges. And that was actually putting the whole organisation into an energy spin. So they named the pattern and literally drew it out, and then brought their people into a series of conversations to explore what that pattern looked like, and to agree some experiments across the whole organisation where, instead of just immediately deploying all of their familiar performance corrective processes and sales activities, they slowed down and actually embarked on some different responses when their sales performance and their financial performance was challenged. And in a way, they disrupted their own disruptor. They disrupted this reactive responding process. They developed some new routines that meant that instead of just examining how they were performing against all of their different metrics, they slowed down and had very different types of conversations about what they thought were driving responses. They brought in different perspectives from the organisation about patterns that were shaping constraints. And they made more time to actually make sense of the critical few priorities. And then, instead of just driving performance and execution activity, they agreed experiments with critical teams to actually try some new things. So that these activities had a profound impact actually on their effectiveness, and we're going to offer some more conversation about this at a later stage, and I can share sort of stage 2 of this story. But those 3 activities had a profound impact on this team's effectiveness. But they also did some other things. They also worked on themselves. I mentioned before they did a Leadership Circle 360 to look at each of their individual creative leadership opportunities. But then they came together into a peer coaching process where they would bring a shared problem that required cross-silo, cross-enterprise activity. And then they would coach each other into more creative responses to address those issues and to support the experiments. So this was a completely new set of activities that this high-performing organisation, very successful organisation, deployed to interrupt those energy disruptors. And it's had a significant impact. So what are the key takeaways? Now let me move to wrap up. So the key takeaways from all of this. A team system matters. Team systems and organisational systems exert a greater influence on individuals than individuals do on the system. So measuring what's really going on is not only something that needs to happen to support the development of a team, it's more than just a challenge about high performance, it's a matter of governance. For your leadership teams at the top, if they're moderate in performance, then more than likely you've got some strategic drift going on. If they're high performance, that's an accomplishment, but the trap is to stay in the routines that just keep polishing performance in what's known and familiar. Being able to experiment and move in and break out into new territory is another process, but really the strategic governance prize. We think it's important to see teaming as important to success as talent management, perhaps even more so. So if you've got talent maps, excellent, keep going. Supporting the development of individuals is fundamental. But also ask yourself this question. If you've got 4, 5, 6 senior leadership teams, what's the map of those teams' effectiveness? How do you know? What's generating energy? What's disrupting energy? What are some responses that would fundamentally change and elevate that team's capacity? And we can learn from sporting teams who make ongoing development and improvement of the team's effectiveness game a fundamental and continuous process. We see far too many leadership teams who do an event once a year or develop an experience for maybe 2 days here or 1 day over there. And it's a bit like saying you want to be a high-performing athlete and just go for 1 run every month, or you want to get fit for a marathon and just do 1 good workout. So if you really want to get out of a stuck effectiveness routine, teams have to commit to a continuous process of looking at the energy generators and the energy disruptors. Now, final thing to sort of wrap up here. So what does that look like depending on whether you're moderate, high, or exceptional? If you're a moderate performance or below, really the core moves are to calm anxiety. And that fintech company that I was talking about a moment ago, that was the first thing they had to do, was to stop the automatic routine, which was to see a problem or to see a criticism that came down onto them from stakeholders, and stop the automatic desire to react and respond and to demonstrate how they were correcting performance. So they had to calm their own anxiety and then bring attention to the disruptive factors and engage the organisation in experiments that began to shift those. If you're a high performance team and need to break out, well, really that's about mastery of the things that amplify generative energy. And in the Bright instrument, the Bright survey, that measurement process that I shared, across each of those 5 dimensions, we measure 26 generators and disruptors. So instead of the challenge with high performance is less about what's disrupting, although that could be there. It's more about what are the 1, 2, or 3 generators that you can amplify. And if you use that instrument, it can tell you specifically what those are, so you can focus those improvement efforts. Part of high performance is also to bring voices of the system in and to open the aperture of awareness much more broadly so that you're thinking differently. Your thinking is much more matched to the complexity of the environment that you're in. And for exceptional, well, that's another set of routines entirely. It's really about becoming familiar with, willing to work with novel and new routines, the willingness and the desire to shift patterns in the system, and the capacity to take an adaptive stance with strategy and learning and performance correction. And that's another whole set of disciplines that we can talk about in another webinar. So I'm going to come off share screen.
A perfect moment to pause, Mark, because we've got lots of good questions in the chat, and actually, I think you've addressed some of them here with your that last screen and kind of showing some of the unlocking moves. I love to see that, and I think that addresses some of the questions that we're asking about specific tips or shifts that can be made to energize teams or to help move teams kind of out of that stuck quality. But there's one or two questions that I wanted to bring to your attention. And one is this: how do you bridge the divide between legacy and newer leaders on a team when you're trying to move a team kind of into that exceptional realm?
I think whenever there's a significant recomposition of a team, particularly if it's the team leader, that's a great opportunity to reset expectations. Because one of the greatest challenges of teams, including high performance teams, is finding new routines that get them out of just searching for the keys under the lamplight and finding ways to disrupt what they're familiar with. And a new team member or recomposition is a great way to do that. So don't waste an opportunity to actually use a new perspective or a new member or a new voice to put the spotlight on assumptions and patterns that might be working but keeping you stuck.
Love that. Here's another one that comes up that's about like energizing teams and team performance. About motivating people? How do you motivate an employee that kind of just is happy staying the course, just wants to do their job, just wants to do their thing? Are there any key moves that you can help to get them into that mode to step out and break out?
Well, it's a good question. So one of the things that we measure on the Bright survey are what we call sharing mindsets. So the mindset a team holds about what its fundamental purpose is and what it means to work together as one is critical. It's one of the most strongest predictors of team effectiveness. So if a team holds together an ambition about not only performing well, but growing and learning and raising the bar, it's very hard for an individual to be a member of that team with a different response. So this is what I mean. It's like, great teams actually create great players. Now, obviously, there's a role of the leader there, but it's the responsibility of a team to create a mindset together that actually also probably makes it very difficult to be a member of that team without also sharing a similar commitment to the kind of expectations and standards that are required.
I think we have time maybe for another question or two. And here's one that I found particularly interesting. How do you manage up and provide the right type of feedback when maybe teams that are lower in the organization are outperforming upper leadership teams?
Just so how do you? So just repeat the question.
Sure. How do you manage up or provide the right kind of feedback or input when lower teams in the organization are outperforming their upper leadership teams,
Their senior leadership team?
senior leadership teams?
Well, it's a great question. Well, I think, and our provocation is that in a world of complexity that we're all operating in, organizations cannot afford to leave the question of, do we have a high effectiveness team, over to chance. So if you want to really hold a senior leadership team to a standard about how they're behaving and the shadow that's casting on the organization, then measure them. So how is the senior leadership team operating? Where is it? Is it low performing, moderate effective, high effectiveness, exceptional? If it has a big transformation agenda but it's operating only at a moderate level, unlikely to be able to achieve that agenda. How does that team, what's their effectiveness relative to teams that they're leading, teams of teams? And so if there's teams that they're leading that have a higher effectiveness score than them, well, that's a governance issue. And so it's very hard to speak upwards into a team to say you're behaving in a way that's causing us problems, but it's very easy to measure, particularly now with this extraordinary bright tool, precisely how a team is operating and whether that's satisfactory given what's needed. So not only measure talent, but measure teams, and it begins to change the game.
That's great. Thank you for going into that. That gives some good clarity, I think, on that idea of when a member of a non-senior leadership team is kind of struggling with, well, but our performance is great, but what's happening up there? Having that data and really showing measurement can be all the argument you need. Maybe. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, excuse me. I know I'm continuing with this provocation. I mean, no accountant in their right mind would have any asset on the asset register of the organisation without knowing precisely whether that asset is impaired or delivering its return on investment. The idea that we would have leadership teams in organisations without knowing precisely whether their effectiveness matches the context is extraordinary. I actually think it's the next wave of what's going to take organisations to the next level. And so that's why it's not only a performance imperative, it's a governance issue.
Well, I love it. I think that's actually a good place for us to pause. We only have a couple of minutes left before the top of the hour. So I want to kind of wrap it up there, if that's okay with you, Mark. And say that, thank you for joining us today. This was a great conversation, so rich, so much information. Thank you, Mark, for sharing all of that data with us and all of your great insight. If you want this kind of leadership or expertise in your organization, we ask that you please put yes in the chat, and we'll reach out to you directly and see how we might work together. And then also ask that you join us next month for another conversation. We're going to be digging into the manufacturing industry and leadership in manufacturing. We'll take a look at some good data. We'll hear some real world stories, and we'll surface insights and gain perspective on what manufacturing leaders need to know right now. That's coming up September 25th. So mark your calendar and watch your inbox or Leadership Circle social channels for details there. I do want to make it clear that as soon as I'm done talking, we're actually going to end the call. But remember that we've been recording this whole session, and in about a week or so, you'll receive an email with a link to the recording and a summary document of those key takeaways and some of this great information that Mark has shared with us. So we'll be on the lookout for that. If you had a question that we didn't get to today in the Q&A or that wasn't addressed somehow, please respond to that email that you get, and we'll do our best to get back to you with some kind of answer and response. And in the meantime, with like a minute and a half left at the top of the hour, I just want to say that on behalf of Leadership Circle and our featured guest, Mark Burrell, I'm Sarah, saying thank you so much for joining us again, for taking the time out of your day to be a part of this webinar. Take care, and we will see you next time. Thanks, everybody.